this very pertinent topic, that is Iranian presidential elections and its implications on foreign policy. I am Fraz Naqvi and I am currently leading the Iran program here at Institute of Regional Studies. Since we all know that Iran was originally supposed to hold the elections in 2025, however, due to the untimely demise of President Ibrahim Raisi in the helicopter crash this year, Iran went on for the snap elections. Top three candidates emerged out as the victorious or the top leading candidates in the electoral process. The first one was Dr. Bakir Kalibaf, the current parliamentary speaker of Iran. The second one was Dr. Saeed Jalili, the former nuclear negotiator, as well as the last one, which is Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian, who is currently the member of parliament. In the two phases, Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian emerged out to be the victorious candidate and would assuming the charge of the next Iranian president. As far as the dynamics are concerned, in the first phase, the voters turnout remained 40%, while in the second phase, the voter turnout went ahead to reach 50% approximately. However, since we know that Masoud Pezeshkian belonged to the reformist camp, while the previous president, Ibrahim Raisi, belonged to the conservative camp, so it had led to the speculations that there might be some sort of foreign policy shift in the Iranian foreign policy. To understand these dynamics and to discuss more on it, we have today the very expert panel of speakers, all from Iran, belonging to different walks of life. But before moving on to the speakers, I would like to invite President IRS Ambassador Jauhar Saleem for his keynote address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Faraz. I hope you could all see me and hear me.
Yes, sir, you are perfectly visible as well as audible.
Wonderful. So it's a pleasure and a privilege for me to be addressing this August gathering virtually on a very important topic. Ibrahim Raisi will long remembered for his contribution to regional peace as well as for building regional cooperation, particularly in the realm of Pakistan-Iran relations. His last visit, that was in April this year. I think it was a landmark visit. During that, detailed parleys were conducted. A host of issues were discussed. Most of those topics were related to building cooperation, particularly economic cooperation between Pakistan and Iran. His untimely demise, unfortunately, has made Iran have new elections. Of course, it was not something which would have helped Iran in smoothly progressing in terms of the agenda that President Raisi had been promoting. And what was the agenda? The agenda was to build regional cooperation, especially in the economic sphere. And with so many countries, we had been pursuing dialogue, we had been building bridges. Now we have to recall that since 2013, Iran has been actively pursuing foreign policy of global engagement. While President Raisi, late President, had invigorated that policy, he had further dynamized that policy. Policy had been there since 2000. It was the JCPOA which had provided the space to Iran for diplomatically engaging with the West. We know how the success of JCPO had marked as a great diplomatic triumph at the time. Unfortunately, the election of President Trump in the US was spanner in the works, and he unilaterally withdrew from it and jeopardized the whole process. What we saw following that was that from the Western countries in Europe, France, for instance, Germany, the leading country, with which it had been building bridges, and there was great prospects reviving the economic that was the case in yesteryears. But unfortunately, when JCPO was jeopardized, President Trump, then Iran had no choice but to at least temporarily abandon that project, put it in abeyance, and move closer to Russia. Now, per se, it was not in any way bad that Iran was moving to Russia. Russia and China, they're very important powers. China was premier economic power in the US. But the point is, that had come at the cost of Iran's drifting away, moving away from the West. Cleavage between Iran and the West. The gap in perceptions increased, and the collaboration, prospects for collaboration between Iran and the West. Since then, Iran had been pursuing different prongs of foreign policy, which say some of those prongs are based on realities we all understand and which are not very much appreciated in the West, where Iran is accused of proxies in the Middle East by advancing some foreign policy objectives which are not looked upon very favorably by the Western countries. But on the other side, there were certain prongs whereby Iran tried to build its soft power, and it tried to, it has tremendous energy, gifted with tremendous. And actually, that infrastructure needs to be maintained and built upon in terms of, how much energy you can actually produce. In some ways, it was working, the foreign policy was working in silos. Some silos were, like as positive by the Western analysts, others seen as so positive. In terms of Iran's immediate neighborhood, we move from Iran's relations with the West to relations with countries in the region. Then what we saw was President Reza, the prime opponent of that, neighborhood first policy, which helped Iran in three ways. Firstly, in terms of consolidating the already existing alliances, both regionally as well as globally. Secondly, in terms of revival of diplomatic ties with erstwhile adversaries, such as the countries, Arab states. In particular, I would like to mention the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. These were the two major rivals. There had been an enduring hostility and enduring rivalry between these two protagonists, both in terms of the ideologies that they promote. But it was President Raisi's vision, which was duly reciprocated by, and where China played an important role, that the world was a breakthrough. And that was good news for all Muslim countries. In Pakistan, which had been called upon countries, which had offered in the past many times, help mediate between these brotherly countries. Then the third prong was to explore new regions for cooperation. It is America, Central Asia, and Africa. Now, these are regions with tremendous national resources. These are regions with growing economy, with a great deal of potential, but at the same time, regions that are not developed here. For Iran, we had seen China a great deal in building economic cooperation. Now, Iran emulated that, building relatively unexplored regions economically, in terms of economic.
But meanwhile, let me move on to our first speaker, Mr. Pooya Mirzaei, who is currently the editor-in-chief of No News Iran International, as well as he has the immense experience of approximately 20 years in the field of journalism, covering the foreign policy and diplomatic beat. And he will be speaking and deliberating on the Iranian foreign policy towards the Middle East, because as we have seen for the past 3 to 4 years, Iran has been quite successful in cultivating its foreign policy towards the Middle East, in which it has consolidated its ties with its partners, as President IRS has already mentioned. Also, Iran has been quite successful in reviving the diplomatic relations with the erstwhile Arab states and the Gulf states, particularly the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and others. So, to deliberate more on this, I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Pooya Mirzaei. Over to you, Mr. Pooya.
There's a problem for connecting. Could you first let me, if you could hear me?
Yeah, you are quite audible, Mr. Pooya. Please go ahead.
Good, thank you very much. But actually, I didn't hear your question. Could you repeat it again?
Yeah, Mr. Pooya, as we have already discussed that in
Can
the
you hear me now?
previous 3 to 4 years. Yes, sir, you are audible. You are audible. We have just moved on to our first speaker, Mr. Pooya Mirzaei, who would be deliberating
Yes.
us on the
Yes,
Iranian.
Faraz?
Yes, who would be deliberating us on the Iranian foreign policy towards the Middle East in terms of both its partnership as well as Iran's revival of diplomatic relations with the Arab states and the Gulf states. Also, Mr. Pooya would be deliberating on the nuclear
Okay.
impact, that whether Iran would
Please go ahead.
continue its, yes, sir, whether Iran would continue its nuclear policy in an assertive manner, or would resort to the negotiations when Masoud Pezeshkian, the president-elect of Iran, has come from the reformist camp. So over to you, Mr. Pooya, with this background.
Thank you very much for the time that you devoted to me. Thanks from Mr. President for his speech. Yes, as you mentioned, Iran started a new era, actually, better to say, during the former late President Raisi to start some new relations, or how can we say, so, some normalizing the relationship with some Arab states around Persian Gulf, or as you may call it, Persian Gulf states, mostly with Saudi Arabia. And these days we can hear about Bahrain. The foreign minister of Bahrain traveled to Iran in a period of less than 2 months, first for the funeral ceremony for the late president, and second for a conference on Asian cooperation. And it was a new happening, a new era. After nearly 13, 14 years, it happened. And about the Saudi Arabia, I'm pretty sure that you have heard that Iran and Saudi Arabia are in a track of making their relationship in going up in higher levels. It started nearly more than a year ago in a meeting between the high top security officials of Iran and Saudi Arabia in Beijing, China, and then with a meeting between two of ministers of foreign affairs. The late Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, martyred Dr. Amir Abdullahian, and the Saudi Arabians. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Pezeshkian's administration and Mr. Pezeshkian's foreign policy team would continue such cooperations and would stay in the same track. In the other side, we have the problem of Zionist regime. This is imminent that we are hearing some news that they may attack southern Lebanon, and they may start a new war with Lebanese and especially with Hezbollah. And the Iranians, the permanent. Could you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Pooya, you are audible.
Yeah, good. And the Iranians' permanent representative in UN warned Zionists that attacking southern Lebanon may start a full activation of resistance front. You know, resistance front is a term that we call for all pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist groups and states in Western Asia, and actually in Western lands neighboring Iran, like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and in Yemen, Houthis and Hezbollah, and all the other groups that are ready to fight Israel. And this is imminent to happen during the start of the Mr. Pezeshkian's administration. You mentioned about the Iran's nuclear program progress. Actually, this is the mindset of the United States of America to mix up these two together. I mean, to mix up the Iran's activities and the events happening in the Western Asia with Iran's nuclear program progress. But inside Iran, Iranian experts are separating these two from each other. And these two are completely different and separate issues. Americans, to tell the truth, you may have heard that Americans tried to continue some indirect backdoor negotiations with Iran in Oman and in Qatar. And in these negotiations, they try to push both of these issues simultaneously together. But I do not think so that Iran would accept to mix these two together. For example, we have heard some news that Americans mentioned, okay, if Iran tries to something to control or to negotiate with Hezbollah or Hamas, in the other side, they would be some easygoing negotiations about the Iranians' nuclear program. But we are thinking about these two issues completely different. The first point is that Israel has started one of the most brutal of his aggressions in this region. And it seems that their prime minister is not going to put an end on it. And we can see there are a lot of politicians inside Israel that are against him. And he knows that after this war, he may directly go to jail behind the bars. Not only because of this war, but also because of a lot of corruptions around him. On the other side, we have the Iranians' nuclear program. Iran has progressed in his nuclear program. We did not change our doctrine toward progressing any military program. But as you may have heard, some top foreign policy officials of Iran have repeated, this is possible if the situation goes on like this, both in the region and around the sanctions. This would be possible to think about changing Iranians' military nuclear program doctrine. To tell the truth, if Iran reaches to this point to change the military nuclear program doctrine changing, I do not think so. It takes a long time to test the first nuke. And Americans, they know this. And Israelis, they know this too. And all of these that I explained to you, this is regardless of any administration in Iran. I mean, these points, we call them the issues related to our national security. And when we reach to our national security, it doesn't make any difference if a conservative administration is running in Iran, if a reformist administration is running in Iran, if a hardliner conservative administration, a moderate administration, doesn't make any difference. I can give you evidences. The first progresses in Iranian nuclear program started during the late president, Mr. Khatami. And right now, he is the leader of the reformists. So during his reformist administration, the first steps to progress this program was started. And then it was during conservative, to some extent, hardliner conservative President Ahmadinejad. And we reached to the higher levels. And then it came President Rouhani, a moderate, we call him. He is neither reformist nor conservative, something in between. And there were, again, progresses. Although the negotiations started with the West and they reached to a deal that you may know about with the name JCPOA, but there were progresses. And when the United States of America left the deal unilaterally, Iran stayed inside the deal and used the same mechanism inside the treaty to again level up and progress the nuclear program. This is very important to know. We have progressed our nuclear program, but we didn't left the treaty. And we have used the same mechanism and a structure inside the treaty, I mean JCPOA. And right now, Americans are trying to push back to the same deal, but to tell the truth, for us Iranians, the same deal is not working anymore. We are in a level, maybe around 9 years ago, 10 years ago, the same deal was something interesting for us. But at the moment, next year, 2025, is something that we call it the sunset point in JCPOA. And going through the same deal is not interesting for us. When we started the negotiations and reached to this treaty, the enrichment percentage in Iranian nuclear facilities was 20%. 20% enrichment of uranium. At the moment, officially we say we have enriched 60% uranium, but there are some unofficial news about very higher enrichment rates. So the same treaty is not working for us. This is about the nuclear program, about the situation with the countries around. The first, it is the Persian Gulf states' choice to choose, first of all, to call this Gulf that you have repeated some as a Gulf, either Gulf or Persian Gulf. This is the easiest and the most accurate indicator to show that either they want to normalize the situation with Iran or not. If they want to continue, call it Gulf. I do not think so. They would be eager to normalize any relationship. The name of this Gulf, gentlemen, is Persian Gulf. It is more than 3,000 years that it is called Persian Gulf. So there is no Gulf estate. There is no, I don't know, Gulf Estate Corporation. These are Persian Gulf Estate and Persian Gulf Corporation or Persian Gulf Estate Corporation. This is the first point. It is very important. And this is completely regardless of, not only regardless of any administration in Iran, this is regardless of any kind of government in Iran. all the Iranian people, either they are pro-Islamic Republic or opposition of Islamic Republic, either they are living inside Iran or outside Iran, the first important indicator for them to show if the Arab countries are sincere to continue good relationship with Iran or not is how they call Persian Gulf. This is the first step. The second step is their security cooperation with Israel. This is very important. Mostly, I'm speaking targeted about Bahrain and Emirates. The way that they are cooperating with Israel in the fields of intelligence and security is very, very important for us. They are geographically located in the southern parts of Persian Gulf, and if they let actually the security and intelligence entities of Zionists coming and going over there and starting some operations over there, it shows that again they are not eager to level up this cooperation. The other point, maybe you have heard, is about the common fossil fuel fields, I call it like this, both the common oil fields and the natural gas fields. You know, under the Persian Gulf, there are some common oil fields and natural gas fields that in most of them, Iran has high shares because Iran has a very long border in the Persian Gulf. Some of them are common with Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and some of them are common with Qatar. And the way that we may reach to a deal to use these common fields, both for most of them are natural gas, but one of them that is very big, we call it Arash oil field. It is common between Iran, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. And the last year, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, first of all, they denied any Iran's right and share. And they pushed this, no, Iran doesn't have any share. And then they changed their rhetoric. So this is the other point that is very, very important for us. Beside the security intelligence cooperation with Zionist regime, the way that they are actually reaching to the Palestine's cause is important for us. The issue of Palestine, again, is one of the other things that is
Mr.
going
Mirzaei,
to be,
sorry for
yes,
interruption. Can you just wind up, please?
Sorry?
Can you just wind up, please, so we could have other speakers as well and would conclude the session in mentioned time.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
the last point is the way that they are treating about the Palestinian cause, you know. Bahrain and Emirates, they have normalized the relationship with Zionists. And we have heard some normalizations are undergoing between Saudi Arabia and Zionists. And these are very important. All of them, I wanted to say, all of these points are very important and effective on the relationship between Iran and the Persian Gulf states. This is the first point. And the second point is that the Iranian nuclear program does not have anything to do with the regional relationship or regional policies of Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mirzaei. You have highlighted some very interesting points. You have mentioned that whether it doesn't really matter that which administration would come to power in Iran, its nuclear policy would remain the same, conditioning upon the relations with its relations with the West and the responses. You have also mentioned that Iran has seen its nuclear policy separate from its regional policy. And you have also mentioned that if Iran wants and determines, it would be quite near to develop the nuclear arsenal. You have also mentioned that the policies with the Persian Gulf states would remain the same if it is reciprocated by those Persian Gulf states. And you have also highlighted that the security and intelligence partnership of some of the Persian Gulf states with Israel could become a friction between the relations of Iran and the Persian Gulf neighbors. With these highlights of your speech, I would like to turn to the second speaker, Dr. Hamid Reza Ghulamzadeh. He is basically the director of Diplomatic House in Tehran, also the Secretary General of Asian Mayors Forum in Tehran. And he would be speaking primarily on Iran's foreign policy towards the Great Powers, because we have seen that over the years, Iran has cultivated the strategic sort of partnership with both China and Russia, while its relation with the US and the West have deteriorated. So with this new administration in power, I would like to question to Dr. Hamid Reza about the continuity of a strategic partnership with Russia and China, as well as Iran's relations, specifically in the JCPOA domain, nuclear negotiation domain with US and the West. Over to you, Dr. Hamid Reza. You have kindly unmute yourself, Dr. Hamid.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, thank
you. So you have me now?
Yeah, you are quite audible.
All right, thank you. So first, thank you very much, Fraz, and also I would like to appreciate the informative comments from Mr. Mirzaei and also Mr. President, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. So I think that we should start with the procedure of setting policies in foreign policies of Iran, which is mainly based on Supreme National Security Council, which is a high-ranking and, let's say, upper hand entity, which is formed by different players and different parties of the officials. So it is headed by the president, and its secretary general is appointed by the president. But the other heads of branches of power, also some ministers, some representatives from the military forces, and also some individuals who are appointed by the leader are members to that council. And this is actually the main body which decides about the master plans of foreign policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and its decisions are considered as law as soon as it is signed and approved by the supreme leader. So it doesn't need any approval from the parliament or guardian council or such things. The supreme councils in Iran, which we have a number of them, can decide and set rules and laws in their own field when their decisions and their the things that they set are signed into law by the leader. So the foreign policy is something that abides by this rule. And the JCPOA and the nuclear talks were mainly actually discussed and approved at this council. It was once Mr. Jaili who was there and participated in the negotiations. Before that, it was Mr. Rouhani. It was during Khatami's administration that he was in this position. Mr. Rouhani was in this position, and he had the talks with the European Troika, and further on, this has been always the main player. But it doesn't mean that the president doesn't have a significant role. Presidents and the foreign ministers can actually set up priorities, and their agenda can, to some extent, change the priorities of the master plan that the Supreme National Security Council has considered. So, for example, the relationship with the neighbors or the shift toward East and such measures that President Raisi took were things that they were actually asked by the leader and the council in the past, but it was not a priority for President Rouhani. So that was actually the main difference between the two, and it shows that how president can be actually affecting the foreign policy of the country. President Rouhani did not put any priority on such relations, and he put all the eggs in the basket of the nuclear talks with the West, and he forgot about the other countries and other alternatives. So President Raisi did not invent any new policies. He actually implemented the already set ones, and it was significant because it was a plan B, we can say, or an alternative to negotiations with the West. He did not deny talks. He actually had some rounds of talks. First, it was by Mr. Araghchi, and then it was Mr. Bagheri who followed the negotiations. But the problem was that the other side of the story did not show any interest in negotiations or in reaching a final result in the negotiations. So Iran needed to take some alternative measures in order to implement its policies and in order to benefit from their international relations for improvement of its economy, which was actually suffering and is still suffering from the sanctions of the United States. So the first one was improving and expanding ties with the neighbors. So Pakistan is a good example, which was actually one of the latest ones. And we have had it was mentioned earlier, that we had the rapprochement with the Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan. We had some tensions in the past, but it was actually the last project that President Raisi did actually inaugurate was a joint project with Azerbaijan and Mr. Aliyev. Bahrain has recently actually expressed interest in reestablishing ties with Iran. You see, these countries actually are the neighboring countries which were priority. So we had, it was actually supposed that, planned that President Raisi visit Iraq just some less than 10 days from the incident. If it did not have happened, he was supposed to actually to visit Iraq as well. So working with neighboring countries was one priority for him. Working with the two Eastern powers, we can say, Russia and China, were two other alternatives. We had actually signed the 25-year agreement with China. It was actually decided during President Rouhani, but he was not serious in doing that. And the Chinese did not consider him as a government who is interested in working with them, and they were actually cold-feeted as well. So after President Raisi came to office, this changed, and they actually worked on that, and it was supposed to have a similar strategic partnership contract with and deal with Russia as well, which was postponed, and it is still on the agenda, and we are hopeful that in the near future it would be signed between the two countries. The other one was joining the coalitions and multilateral relations, actually. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS Plus were actually the main two ones that again, we had some tensions with Tajikistan, some misunderstandings actually between Iran and Tajikistan. It was the only country that opposed Iran to join the SCO. and it was easily solved after Mirzaei had its first foreign trip to Tajikistan, and they actually discussed it beforehand, so that Iran could go there and join the SCO. And these coalitions can pave the ground actually for further economic relations, especially the policy of de-dollarization that many of these countries are pursuing. So it can happen through them. It was actually the recent days, the news came out that Iran and Russia are going to establish banking transactions at the individual level from the late August. If I'm not wrong, it would be 22nd of August. There should be some possibility that Iranians can use their bank cards in Russia, and the Russians can use them inside Iran. So it would be directly between Iranian rial and Russian ruble. So it would be some sort of avoiding from using US dollar in their transaction, in their trade. So these alternatives are going to help the relations with the West as well. I just forgot to mention the Global South is also another point which was started, but it was not complete and accomplished actually. So working with South American countries or with African countries was also on the agenda of President Raisi. So these are actually the items that can help Iran's diplomacy toward the West. So the first point about the JCPOA, which actually had led to the Western countries, Europeans and Americans, not to be interested in giving any points to Iran, was that they felt that Iran is in dire need of the JCPOA and the deal. President Raisi proved that there is no need for that. So Iran is selling a considerable amount of oil every day, and it is despite the American sanctions. And the Americans have actually it was a couple of months ago that Mr. Blinken admitted that the Americans are unable to disrupt this oil export, so they cannot stop it. It's not just they don't want it, they are not able to do that. So these alternatives are important to give actually further opportunity to the negotiators if they want to have negotiations, as Mr. Pezeshkian has said that it's going to be his main priority in foreign policy. However, I'm not sure that it would be possible because have changes in France and UK in the elections, and they're going to suffer from the domestic politics for a short time. And we are going to have the elections in November in the United States, and it's very likely that Mr. Trump would be the president in January. And if it is like that, it would be a big challenge for Mr. Pezeshkian to have negotiations, because he was the very person who withdrew from the JCPOA, and it is not interesting for him to get back. And we should consider that in 2025, in October, it's going to be the 10th anniversary of the JCPOA, and it means that all the sanctions should be automatically removed, and all the resolutions of the UN Security Council and all these things would be removed. It's actually the final deadline in the JCPOA. And based on the experience that we had last year, it was on the 8th year, it was supposed that the limitations and sanctions on the missile program of Iran would be removed. It was actually removed, but the European countries decided to reimpose them unilaterally. Let's say that they decided to do it from the European side. They reimpose all these same sanctions. Of course, it's not going to affect Iranian foreign policy, Iranian missile program. But anyway, it shows that the European Troika are not interested in practicing the JCPOA and implementing their commitments within the JCPOA. So what remains the option for them? Because if they are going to do the same thing next year, it means that they are actually going to boycott themselves from the rest of the world, because all the UN sanctions and all the limitations are supposed to be removed. The only chance they have is to actually use the snapback mechanism, which would be a threat to the negotiations. So if they want to negotiate, they cannot use the snapback. And if they use the snapback, it would be Iran changing its policy and its actually doctrine about the nuclear talks. And it would be something that neither side would want. So the main position for the main possibility for Mr. Pezeshkian in terms of improving economy and using foreign policy in favor of economy would be to following the steps of President Raisi and to look for the alternatives, because it is impossible to have any nuclear talks for about a year from now. And it takes time for him to come to office. It would take time to set the agenda, and it would take time for the Americans to have the elections, and because they are the main problem at the JCPOA. And the Europeans have proved that they are not going to be independent actors in this issue, because neither during the Trump nor during the Biden administration they did anything independently, and they just adhere to whatever that the Americans actually dictated to them. So these are actually the main problems for the nuclear talks. That is the top agenda. So what he can do is to follow the alternatives. And of course, we should not forget the region as well. Of course, it was discussed, and I think that will be discussed in other speeches as well. But I think that with the new world order that is being shaped, and with this current situation that we have in the West Asia, the situation is not something like 2015. And it's not just like simply considering the Western countries as the top powers and major powers in the world, and work with them and discuss with them, give some actually incentives to them so that they would remove the sanctions. The world has totally changed. The Americans are not the superpower anymore, and the Europeans are the countries who actually themselves, I remember in Munich Security Council Security Conference in 2020, they discussed about the Westlessness. So the Europeans themselves admitted that the Europeans are not a role model, and the Westerners actually are not a role model for the world anymore, and they are not adhering to their own values. So these let's say identity crisis that has happened in the West is something that is not only in the society, it is also in the global role as well. So the Americans and the Europeans cannot decide for the rest of the world anymore. They are challenging with Yemen. United States and UK are challenging actually with the poorest country in Red Sea, and they cannot do anything against that. So the Yemenis can actually have the upper hand in Red Sea, and they are supporting the Palestinians. The incident, the events and developments since October 7 and the Al-Aqsa operation was actually has changed everything, and it's proved that the Israelis, as the strategic allies of the Americans in the region, do not have any certain power here, and they cannot have the final say here. They have fought not a country, just a group which has been under sanctions and for many decades, and they cannot defeat them. It is actually a terrible incident for the Israelis and for the Americans who have supported them. We saw that when Iran attacked and carried out that
Dr.
operation.
Hamid,
I'm just wrapping up in 1 minute. Yeah, I'm wrapping up in 1 minute. So when Iran carried out that operation, that missile operation against the Israelis, only Iran actually used a small fraction of its power, and used own drones, own class drones, and the missiles that were very owned, and they were actually expiring. And so Iran used them to sort of benefit from them. And on the other side, the Americans the Europeans, the British, the French came to help the Israelis. Some Arab countries came to help the Israelis, and Israelis were prepared full-fledged. And it was announced from beforehand that we are going to attack them. We are going to actually retaliate what had happened in Damascus, and they could not stop Iran. At the end of the day, some missiles hit the ground, and they were impacting. Actually, they impacted the land there. So Iran was successful in standing against all these groups. So all of them came there, and they were full prepared, and they could not stop Iran. So it was just Iran and just using a part of its power. So if it comes to other resistance fronts and also the full capacities of Iranian defense system, it would be a nightmare for them. So the power has changed in the whole world, and it is being shaped, and Iran needs to consider that. And it's not just about the nuclear talk. So even if President Pezeshkian, President-elect Pezeshkian, is going to think like President Rouhani, it would not be possible for him because of the realities on the ground, inside the country, in the region, and in the world. And so he needs to change his policies. And it is something that the Iranian Supreme National Security Council would demand him as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamid Reza Ghulamzadeh. You have mentioned that in order for the maximum benefit, the president-elect, Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian, would have to restore to an extent to the policies of the previous president, Ibrahim Raisi, because of the ground realities. And you are very, very true in this regard that there are chances that in the next US presidential elections, Donald Trump might win again. And if he wins, we might see another sort of maximum pressure campaign onto the Iran that would further jeopardize the chances of the reviving of JCPOA. You have also mentioned about the priorities in the Iranian foreign policy, and that is the first priority is obviously the neighborhood first policy, in which both the states from the eastern as well as the Iranian western side are of pertinent importance. The second one is Iran's priority to look towards the eastern power, specifically China and Russia, for the very basic reason that Iran has signed the strategic strategic agreements spreading onto the 25 years. With this point of yours, I would like to move towards our last speaker of this session, Dr. Mozaffari, who is also the professor at University of Tehran, teaching at the subcontinent studies, and he would be speaking on the topic that is very relevant to this part of the world, and that is Iranian foreign policy towards South Asia, because we have seen that Iran has adopted a sort of pragmatic foreign policy with regards to South Asia, in which Iran has revived the long delayed Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline with Pakistan, and Iran has also upgraded the Chabahar agreement with India. So in this sense, Iran has balanced the two South Asian rivals and try to maximize its interest in this region. With this backdrop, I would like to invite Dr. Mozaffari for the further deliberation. Over to you, Dr. Mozaffari. Can you hear Dr. Mozaffari? I think there has been some technical issue on the part of Dr. Mozaffari. Meanwhile, there is a question for you, Mr. Pooya Mirzaei, that given the tilt of President-elect Dr. Pezeshkian to the Rouhani's administration, do you see that it would impact the Iranian nuclear negotiations policy towards the United States, specifically with regards to the revival of JCPOA?
If I would understand your question very well. You mean that if Mr. Pezeshkian is going to start the negotiations for the revival of JCPOA, yes?
Yes, precisely.
Definitely, the point is that although the late President Mr. Raisi, he has tried to revive, I'm explain to you the problem of JCPOA is not from the Iranian side, regardless if it is the reformist or the conservative or the moderate administration inside Iran. Definitely, Pezeshkian is going to try to start the negotiations for the revival of JCPOA. But this is very important. These negotiations would not be started in any expenses, This is very important. It doesn't mean that Pezeshkian is going to try to start these negotiations with any expense or any conditions. No, it's not like that. But yes, if there would be any opportunity from the Western side, I mean from the American side, yes, he's going to start. I think Mr. Mozaffari is back.
Yeah, Mr. Mozaffari is back. Welcome back, Dr. Mozaffari. May I repeat the question that Iranian foreign policy towards South Asia has been quite pragmatic and balanced approach in which Iran has tried to maximize its foreign policy interest vis-a-vis South Asia by reviving the long-standing gas pipeline with Pakistan, as well as by upgrading the Chabahar port agreement with India. So, how do you see in this new administration the Iranian foreign policy towards South Asia would be changed or would persist to the previous policy that we have seen for the past 3 to 4 years?
Uh, First of all, do you want me to answer, or is that? I
Yeah, it is
apologize.
directed to you, Dr. Mozaffari.
Okay, so first of all, because can you also give access for sharing, please? Thank you. I have a PowerPoint. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. I apologize for getting cut off just a few minutes. I'm pleased to be amongst you, and I'm especially delighted to hear Ambassador Jauhar Saleem and my dear colleagues from Iran, Mr. Pooya Mirzaei, sorry, and Dr. Hamid Reza. I thoroughly enjoyed their talks and their views. And definitely these views are important, particularly as far as those highlighted and made in a bold way by Dr. Reza about the importance of being independent actors, especially in these important and relevant times. Unfortunately, we have seen that many Europeans, as well as many regional nations, have been unable to act independently. And definitely, as Iranians, we love to see that, nations act more independently and can decide as far as international issues, for example, on Gaza, on the sad events that's been happening, as well as other regional aspects. And the name of Persian Gulf, as stated by my good mate, friend, Mr. Mirzaei, definitely there was back in 1994, in August, as well as in 2011, the United Nations has definitely specified the name should be Persian Gulf and not Gulf, because sometimes to people in the US, when you say Gulf, they might be remembered, Gulf of Mexico, or if you're been to Australia or New Zealand, Gulf refers to the Gulf of Carpentaria. And in the same sense that, for example, we don't change the name of Pakistan Sea to India Sea, the same way that we expect that, people respect that in international relations as well as political and foreign affairs. Referring to this peace pipeline, actually this coming back to my talk today, I will be talking about South Asia and Iran's neighborhood policy. This has been a long, as far as I remember, there has been talks of this peace pipeline. This is a major project of carrying gas, etc., from Iran all the way to Pakistan, as well as to further on to India, as well as even Bangladesh. There's been talk, and even Burma, there's been some talks on that. And this is certainly important and significant as far as the peace pipeline project is. Unfortunately, there has been a lot of tampering. There has been a lot of problems associated with it. Iran has kept to its word, has completed the work all the way to its border, has been even offering Pakistan that, look, as you know, Muslim brothers, as neighbors, we are willing to, you know, help you out if it's the cost is an issue, etc. But there's been a lot of power politics, as well as, you know, issues referring to the U.S. hegemony, etc., and also sanctions that my previous colleagues have indicated, that has been hampering the progress. Pakistan gladly, in the recent time of Mr. Raisi, has taken a hard stance and has said that they will take their commitment and inshallah, or God willing, complete their task. And I believe it's important for Pakistan, not only for relations between Iran and Pakistan, but for the Pakistani and people in the Indian subcontinent. As you know, as you may be living in places such as Karachi or Lahore or other cities, or Multan, you have been experiencing a lot of electricity cuts. And in Karachi, I remember every day, you know, not having electricity for sometimes more than 10 hours a day, particularly during summer times. And it's a regular thing. And this Peace Life project would definitely help to a great extent electricity issues and other issues, and it will make it cheaper, as well as it's good for, you know, the regional economies. Definitely good for Iran as well as for the subcontinent. Going back to my talk and looking at this neighborhood policy, I see if I can use my PowerPoint. If been, yep, let me just, if I can. What I'll do, I'll continue without using my PowerPoint, but this neighborhood policy that we have with certainly subcontinent is important for us in Iran. In the subcontinent for, you know, more than a millennia has always been our neighbor, and we have always considered the subcontinent as family. It's important for us. And so it's a family matter for us, as far as we look at, as Iranians, when we look at the subcontinent. Historically as well, anthropologists, historical archaeologists, etc., they always assume that, you know, we are the same people that have been settled in this region religiously. We have a lot of similarities linguistically, etc., ethnically, culturally. And I should point out to a fact as well, that we as because I'm taking, one of the issues is I'm taking from the Iranian perspective, as was, you know, my talk. We in Iran historically have been looking at the subcontinent starting from the Indus River. Sindh and Punjab for us are where India starts, and that was historically where the borders were. So this tradition is quite old, and particularly it's been since the creation of Pakistan in 1947. We have genuinely found a lot more connections with the subcontinent. Another difference, perhaps a difference that we have with nations in South Asia, is the fact that South Asian nations maybe consider Afghanistan as part of South Asia, but we in Iran don't consider Afghanistan part of South Asia. Rather, for us, it's a start from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc. There are, of course, some other geopoliticians, etc., that even consider Iran as part of South Asia. And that's a different matter altogether, but that's certainly the links are too strong, as we say. There's definitely a conundrum, as pointed out by my previous speaker as well, as far as JCPOA in 2015, which was signed, the Iran deal, that's another name for it, which happened during the time of President Rouhani Iran, and it was implemented in 2016, and it went on for about 2 years. There was a boost in Iranian trade relations with all nations. Much of the sanctions were taken. And when I talk about sanctions, bear in mind that until recently, in which Russia overtook Iran in the matter of number of sanctions, Iran was sort of had the Guinness World Record in number of sanctions. We have almost, I think, about 8,000 sanctions. Russia now has about 18,000 sanctions. It affects all aspects of economy. There are sanctions by the United Nations, which maybe the number is quite small, but then we have those implemented by the US. And some of these sanctions actually don't make any sense. For example, the US just withdrew from JCPOA, and suddenly, nations like European nations, etc., which were bound to it, they were weak in a sense. They were powerless to do anything about it or implement it. And many of these companies that were in Iran, they just simply said, well, just because the US told us to leave, we have to leave, even though legally we are doing the right thing to being in Iran. It has created a lot of problems during that period, particularly from around 2018 to the election of President Raisi. At the time, the relations between Iran as well as our neighbors in subcontinent in particularly dropped dramatically. We were experiencing something like around $20 billion of trade with India, and perhaps around 5 to 10 billion with Pakistan, directly and indirectly, considering Dubai, places like Dubai and Sharjah and other places, which even Singapore, we were doing trade with Pakistan through Singapore or with the subcontinent. And suddenly this dropped to a few $100 million, and which was devastating for Iranian's economy, its progress, development, etc. Then in 2021, we had this election in Iran, and President Raisi came into power. There were many at the beginning who had their doubts because of the extent, or maybe nobody really wanted the job at the time because of the extent that President Donald Trump in the US was in fact bullying and calling out names, etc., and threatening nations that, if they do deal with Iran directly, etc. So when the late Mr. Raisi Dr. Raisi came into power, he had many challenges. And there was, in fact, a shift of focus. Unfortunately, something that's been happening in the Orient, in the East, amongst Asian nations, African nations, Americans, is that we've always had this vision of looking to the West for technology, for advancement, etc. And Iran, even though we've been independent, there was a tension in which there was arguments that we have to collaborate with the West in order for, to get the green light and get the things moving, or the ball moving, basically. Then President Raisi and his cabinet, basically, as soon as they came into power, within a month, they implemented something called the neighborhood policy. It wasn't new. We already had it before, since the 1980s. And he said, why should we, bother chasing the West and, the Europeans to recommit themselves, or the Americans to come back, etc. While we're doing that, we don't forget that. I mean, there's the reality, political reality that we have, but concurrently, we must keep our relations, good relations with the East, with Asia. This is where our heart is. There's where our soft power is. We as Iranians and the subcontinent, we have had thousands of years of history. When people in the subcontinent, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, if you go to Bangladesh, for example, as far as the Burmese border or Myanmar border, you come across Persian poetry, Sufi poetry, all sorts of cultural activities, and names, etc., that are Persian. Even in southern India, northern Nepal, even. And so when you think of Persia or Iran in the context of subcontinent, you have a positive view of Iran. While the British, they influenced the subcontinent language, etc., but they came as aggressors, they came as occupiers, as colonizers. And thus, there was this shift that, our soft power, our heart belongs to this part of the world. We understand better when we shake our hands for doing business. That's it. We sometimes don't need to go to do it. It has to be black and white, but, shaking hand for us is also important. This is something that's vivid within the subcontinent culture. This is vivid within the Chinese culture, etc., within the Africa, within etc. President Raisi himself was one of the first to actually visit Africa, visit many nations, Indonesia, Pakistan. He took the step to come to, Sri Lanka. He carried on many projects. So there was this shift of trade and outlook to the East, which the first step is actually the subcontinent. How, do we consider the subcontinent as a neighbor or as family? Which just, for us, it's important to, to consider this important linkage that we have. And he also came with this look to the East policy that my colleague pointed out, as well as this shift to Asia. The future, even in the Western countries, they always talk about, Asia, it's where, the money is there now, it's all the action and the markets, etc. are. And definitely this was a new shift, new beginning for Iran as far as our foreign policy, to a great extent, in economic terms particularly. Again, I must put it in a footnote that previous governments also tried to implement this, as well as the time of Ayatollah Khomeini, and Ayatollah Khomeini have also pointed out to this great fact that, these nations, these regions are our brothers. Maybe they are not even Muslim. The criteria or parameters is not that they're certainly Muslim. They're nations that have suffered from through colonialism, through they have experience, as well as they are developing and they're family oriented, etc. So they have many points that sort of we can tick in the box, basically, together with each other. So they had this great shift during the time of President Raisi. It was important multilaterally for security reasons, economic reasons, political reasons, for curbing sanctions, unjust sanctions against Iran as well. And there's also this commonality or connections in international political scene. For example, Iran and places like Pakistan or Bangladesh, we are members of the D8 Development 8 non-NGO, NAM, a non-aligned movement, the Islamic Countries Association, and many more within the UN, ECO, for example, Iran and Pakistan are members. There was simply, we already had these things in place. And during the time of President Raisi, it was the time that he basically looked at it seriously. This was something that was not taken by previous presidents. And it's interesting that since 2021, and bearing in mind that the US has not limited its sanctions, they did not, even with the coming of President Biden, they did not change their actions. In fact, more sanctions were implemented on Iran. But suddenly we saw an increase in trade between Iran and many of the subcontinent nations, many nations, but since my focus is on South Asia, for example, with Pakistan, the trade went up to about 96%, from a few $100 million during the time of post-President Trump. Suddenly, it's reached almost between $2 to $3 billion, and which is quite high, and it can definitely go higher. In 2023, for example, it went up to about 40%. With Bangladesh, the growth has been about 75% bilateral trade between Iran and Bangladesh since 2021. For the first time, Iran's trade with Bangladesh reached about more than $1 billion in 2023. With India as well, some estimates put the relations this year for around $5 billion. Not as much as 20 billion that we had before, but it's gone up dramatically since before the time of President Raisi, and which is quite significant. And we can see definitely this shift that's been happening. Some scholars attribute this to Iran's change of policy, as well as Iran shifting away from this idea of soft power into more into smart power. Iran definitely responded to the atrocities of that's been happening in Gaza, the attacks on Iranian citizens, and I think that was important because that showed for the first time that a Muslim nation can take its own initiative and the step to defend its citizens' rights, as well as the idea of justice and suffering. And that's interesting because now, specifically that we have the month of Muharram, and perhaps some of us are looking into this idea of suffering and the tragedies that are acquainted with it. There's a saying by Imam Hussein that trust your neighbors as they were your family and love them as they were your family. And definitely neighbors are important for Iran, definitely in that context. And certainly that was a big achievement by Iran, as pointed out by my previous colleagues as well. Iran's response was quite extensive, several hundred of drones, etc., and missiles towards Israel, and some expired, as my colleague used it, drones, just to basically make a fool of the Israelis. At the same time, hitting about 16 targets that they were intended to target with their ballistic missiles. Perhaps that's also an important factor, and we have seen a change of attitude as well that's been happening across Asia. My colleagues before, they pointed out that perhaps this reflects this change of view that's been taken from this Eurocentric views that we had, or the idea of West. Many Europeans have now realized, okay, we've been good servants of the US, and we've been saying yes, and during their bullying or whatever, but have we achieved really much out of it? Some other nations as well, maybe regional neighbors as well, they have said the same thing, but definitely how long can you let a bully you around? We've seen now with places such as Malaysia, for example, India itself, which is remarkable, as well as Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and many other nations, even some African nations.
Dr. Mozaffari, just one last minute, please.
Okay, so they're coming up and they have been saying that they're defending the relations with places like Iran and even the peace projects that's been happening, the peace pipeline, as you pointed out, that was your earlier question. Going now into Mr. President Pezeshkian, I believe my previous colleague has said that he has President Dr. Pezeshkian is not changing his attitude. Definitely, he has indicated so. He will continue with his foreign neighborhood policy, as well as look to the east, as well as he's trying to counter that or making a balance, as well as saying that, okay, look, the West is also important because we have to negotiate with them and get them back, because still for investment, for growth, etc., we need to look both to the east and west and make it so some sort of a balance to have it together. So this is kind of just giving you a snapshot, perhaps. It's just an overview, just of these relations that we have, definitely between Iran and its neighborhood nations, particularly as far as South Asia is involved. So thanking you all, and thanking you for being part of this panel. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mozaffari. It was indeed quite an enriching discussion. We are already short of time, but we can take a couple of questions, one each, directed to each speaker. The first question from the audience is directed to Dr. Hamid Reza. Sir, it has been asked from you that do you think that Masoud Pezeshkian, the president-elect, his tilt towards negotiation with the West would be contradictory to the strategic partnership with the Eastern powers like Russia and China? So how do you see it, whether it be contradictory or complementary? And adding to that, would it result in the sort of internal power struggle within Iran, with some of the factions would favor the negotiations with the West, while the other would oppose interacting with the West? How do you visualize it?
The main agenda for the negotiation with the West is the nuclear talks and JCPOA, and it's something that has been decided by the whole system. So it is not like that any party or faction inside the country is against that. So we shall consider this first in mind. But for the negotiations, it is clear that different people could have different ideas, and they could have different views about how to discuss the issues with them. It won't be accepted from him to actually think unilaterally and work only with the West. And as I said, I discussed that he needs actually to consider the East as well. And he also signaled that when in one of his TV programs, in which he was supposed to discuss his foreign policy, and he could have two advisors next to him, he had Mr. Zarif, former foreign minister, which is somehow a symbol of nuclear talks. And he also had former Iranian ambassador to Russia, Mr. Sanoi, whose area of study is mainly Russia and also China to some extent. And it was sort of a signal that I would pay attention to the East as well. So he had considered East even in the TV programs that he had during the election time. So based on the decisions that the Security Council of Iran would make, it is expected from him, as according to what we know from the Iranian principles and foreign policies and the master plans of foreign policy, he is expected to make this balance between East and West and other alternatives that I explained earlier. So they want him to have the negotiations. It would be good for anyone inside the country to make the JCPOA implemented in its full capacity by both sides, but not only from the Iranian side, and also have other relations with the other countries as well. So far, the Russia and China have been considered as an alternative to the JCPOA. If JCPOA is actually implemented fully, then it would be something extra, and it would be easier to work with the neighboring countries, with Russia, with China, and with anyone else. And that is not something that they are going to ignore and forget that. During President Rouhani, this mistake was taken once, and neither the Supreme National Security Council nor the other activists are going to actually make it possible for them. So, but the only factor in between is that who is going to be Foreign Minister for Mr. Pezeshkian? It is very likely to be Mr. Araghchi, of course, who is a former negotiator and a former deputy foreign minister. And he is now in a body in the council which is somehow connected to the leader's office. But it is very important, since Mr. Zarif is considered an idealist in foreign policy, how he is going to play a role, because he was a significant person and figure in Pezeshkian's campaign during the election. And it is very important which position he is going to take and how influential he is going to be in foreign policy. It is very important, actually, because his ideas are very idealistic in foreign policy. And Iranian foreign policy needs to be realistic, actually. And it is actually the leader has a realist approach in foreign policy. So this balance between these two approaches is very important. And the person who is going to take office as the foreign minister can be a let's say a top figure and a significant indicator of how this can be handled.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamid Reza. The next question is directed to Mr. Pooya Mirzaei. Mr. Mirzaei, although Dr. Pezeshkian has won the election, but there is a popular speculation that 50% of the masses did not come out for vote. So, in order to mobilize those 50% who did not vote, is there any sort of possibility that Dr. Pezeshkian would take some popular decision in terms of foreign policy to mobilize those 50%? And linked to that is the question that, since we all know that next year in 2025 the JCPOA program will expire, so would it provoke or invoke Iran to actively pursue some alternative options to come out from these sort of economic sanctions that the US has imposed?
Sorry. First of all, about your first question, let me inverse it. When you were speaking about 50% of people didn't participate or boycott, do you use the term boycott for the Europeans when they're not participating in the elections? As I know, actually, in most of the European countries, the turnout is around 50%. In the United States of America, most of the time, the turnout is around 50, sometimes less than 50. And I think this is same sometimes with your country in Pakistan. In Pakistan, I've never seen that 100% of people voting in any election in Pakistan. I don't know if you have any track of 100% participation. Would you show it to us? Sorry. So
yeah,
this
please
is not a
continue.
good.
Please continue.
Yeah, this is not a correct, a realistic view or theme to say that 50% of people boycotted the election or something like that. Iranian people has some criticizers like any other people all over the world in any other countries, and we do not call them boycott. The other term is that when a president is elected in a country, the president is the president of all the people in the country. The last time in 2020, there were so many problems around the American presidential election. But at the end, Biden was the president of the United States of America. And right now, it's like this. Mr. Pezeshkian is the president of Iran. He is the president of those ones that didn't participate. He is the president of those ones that voted for the other person, Mr. Jalili. So definitely his administrations would first analyze and then have some policies and approaches that considers the voice of those didn't participate and the voice of those that participated but voted for his rival, Mr. Jalili. The second question was about the something that we call it sunset in JCPOA in 2025, after 10 years. You know, as my friend explained, we had this experience about the sanctions on Iranian weapons industry, not only missile industry. You know, Iran has a very high-tech, powerful weaponry industry in the world, we can say. And there were sanctions on selling or buying some parts for weapon on Iran. But it was terminated, I think, last year or 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly. Maybe Mr. Hamid Reza knows exactly. What happened exactly? The United States of America and some European countries, they have lost their share in this trade because actually it was a trade. And what happened for Iran? Iran started trading Iran started to develop trading opportunities with some countries in Africa, in some countries in Asia, Southeast Asia, and with Russia. Iran had some weaponry trading with Russia. This is the same for the other sanctions that will be terminated next year. If there would be any unilateral sanctions from the United States or European countries' side, this is actually their own problem. Iran has maybe the second, some people say first, but I think actually second is right. The second fossil fuel reservoirs in the world. I mean, oil and gas together. So putting sanction on Iran from European side or from the American side, it's their own problem, actually. It's not Iranian problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mirzaei. It was indeed a comprehensive analysis and comprehensive response. So in order to conclude today's session, what we have talked about right now is that in terms of Iranian foreign policy, it would remain consistent regardless of the administration that would take over, either from the conservative side or from the reformist side. And with regards to Iranian nuclear option, it is primarily dependent upon the US response, that how the US would respond to the Iranian query. If the US is willing, Iran is also willing to negotiate the nuclear issue. And if it is not willing, we might see an assertive nuclear posture. We have also discussed that in terms of foreign policy, it is not vested upon any one individual, rather it is an institutional framing, particularly in the context of Supreme National Security Council, with regards with regards to the willingness of the supreme leader as well as the president. We have also discussed in the in the Iranian foreign policy that we have also discussed that in the context of Iranian foreign policy, the neighborhood first policy is the priority, followed by Iran's look east policy, in which Iran is looking to cultivate its ties with both Eastern powers, Russia and China. We have also discussed that on the issue of Iran, specifically on Iranian sanctions as well as Iranian nuclear program, we might see a division between the US and the European partners of the US, because the Europe is right now going through the identity crisis as well as its unhappiness with the US leadership role. We have also seen that Iran ties with Pakistan, with India, with other neighboring states Caucasus region, the Middle Eastern regions, they are not only dependent upon state-to-state affairs, but rather they have the civilizational linkages, cultural linkages, religious linkages, and the most important, the persistence of Iranian soft power in this region make this region the priority number one for Iran. And in this context, specifically after the US withdrawal, we have seen on the quite contradictory point that Iran's trade, economic cooperation with the Eastern powers as well as the Eastern states have skyrocketed. Dr. Mozaffari has pointed out with regards to Pak-Iran trade that has surged to 96% after 2020. So with all these in view, we can safely conclude that the policy of the president-elect, Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian, would continue to be same at the larger level. Yes, there might be a sort of tilt towards negotiations with the US if the US would show its willingness to engage diplomatically with Iran. So with these notes, I would like to thank all the three speakers, Mr. Pooya Mirzaei, Dr. Hamid Reza, and Dr. Mozaffari, for joining us all the way from Tehran and give us the insight view of Iranian foreign policy from the Iranian perspective, because we have largely read and hear the Western perspective with regards to the Iranian foreign policy, but to analyze the Iranian foreign policy from the indigenous lens, it is what quite important in order to cultivate stronger and better relations with the neighbor as well as the globe at large. So on the behalf of President, Institute of Regional Studies, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem, and all my colleagues, I would like to thank all of you, all the audience, for joining us from different strata of life and from different regions. Thank you so much, Mr. Mirzaei. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamid Raza, and thank you so much, Dr. Mozaffari. Hopefully, for the next events, we would like to engage all of you again for some different topic and to get benefit from your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. I try to answer some of the questions on the chat. So thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you
God
very
bless
much. Have a good
you. God bless.